Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, President Trump hits pause on many of his tariffs, the global response, plus how the back and forth is affecting businesses and consumers. Amid a roller coaster week for the stock market, how the global trade wars could affect Americans' personal finances. And Judy Woodruff goes underground to explore some of the little-known, sometimes life-saving work done by government employees who are now being fired en masse.
If you want to destroy the society, you destroy the government.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. President Trump stunned many this afternoon by pausing higher tariff rates on most countries for 90 days, just hours after they kicked in. The president raised tariffs specifically on Chinese imports to 125% after Beijing retaliated overnight. And a 10% across-the-board tariff that took effect last week remains in place. All of this led to an historic day of market rallies after multiple days of steep drops. The Dow closed almost 3,000 points higher, up nearly 8%. The Nasdaq rocketed to its best day in nearly a quarter century, up 12%. And the broadest measure, the S&P 500, had its biggest gain since 2008, up 9.5%. Lisa Desjardins begins our coverage.
An extraordinary change of course after a night of market turmoil and action by other global powers.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
Speaking at a NASCAR event at the White House, President Trump explained why he paused a wave of tariffs on much of the world hours after they took effect.
A deal's going to be made with every one of them, and they'll be fair deals. I just want fair. They will be fair deals for everybody.
Earlier, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent insisted the pause has always been part of President Trump's strategy.
President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself. We are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate, things will turn out well.
But before the announcement, Europe did retaliate with 25% tariffs. And China responded with 84% tariffs on U.S. goods. That in response to earlier tariff hikes from the Trump administration.
The U.S. continues to impose excessive tariffs and exert extreme pressure on China. China firmly opposes and will never accept such hegemonic and bullying behavior.
President Trump's mercurial tariff policy has led Europeans to rethink their trade alliances. Spanish President Pedro Sanchez met with leaders in Vietnam, which also faced steep tariffs now on hold. He put it bluntly.
No one wins with trade wars. All countries lose.
This a day after House Republican Whip Tom Emmer told NewsHour that the Treasury Secretary pledged in private yesterday that wide negotiations are starting now. President Trump signaled as much at a Republican dinner last night.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal.
In fact, just as U.S. markets were opening for the day, Trump gave investors a specific message, posting on Truth Social, "Be cool," and "This is a great time to buy." Before the White House reversed course, businesses spent the morning tentatively lowering their forecasts. Delta Airlines CEO told CNBC they no longer were expecting growth in 2025.
Everything has stalled, and so there's been a freeze until we get better clarity, and the hope is the administration moves quickly through the uncertainty. I think our economy is going to continue to lose steam.
Echoing that view at the time, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon on Fox Business.
Do you personally expect a recession?
I am going to defer to my economists at this point, but I think probably that's a likely outcome.
On Wall Street, a sell-off of U.S. Treasuries overnight roiled the bond market as some investors fear the U.S. may no longer be a safe long-term bet. Asked if that was a factor in freezing tariffs, Trump told reporters,
The bond market is very tricky. I was watching it, but if you look at it now, it's beautiful. The bond market right now is beautiful. But yeah, I saw last night where people were getting a little queasy.
On Capitol Hill today, Senate Democrats reacted sharply.
Donald Trump is feeling the heat from Democrats and across America about how bad these tariffs are. He is reeling, he is retreating, and that is a good thing.
Speaking to Congress, U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer was asked if this was all a ploy to help large investors buy low.
If it was a plan, if it was always the plan, how is this not market manipulation?
It's not market manipulation, sir.
Well, then what is it? Because it sure is not a strategy.
We're trying to reset the global trade system.
Who's benefiting? What billionaire just got richer?
Elsewhere in Washington, Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer said she supported bringing back American manufacturing, but said the president's tariffs have been hard on her state, which President Trump won in 2024.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. These last few days have been really tough for Michigan. It really is a triple whammy. Higher costs, fewer jobs, and more uncertainty.
For how long? That is also uncertain. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
And joining us now to discuss all of this is Simon Johnson. He's a professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management and the former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. Also with us is Douglas Irwin, an economist at Dartmouth College and the author of Clashing Over Commerce, a history of U.S. trade policy. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. And Simon, I want to begin with you. Just your reaction to the president's decision to pause most of those tariffs for 90 days. What do you make of it, and also why he did it?
Well, it's a remarkable climb down, Amna, really. I think the last week has been chaotic around the world. A lot of alarm, a lot of dismay across the American business sector. It really felt like a strategy that had no point, no coherence, and it was very badly communicated. So I think it's a big sense of relief for me personally and for pretty much everyone in the country and around the world that we've come to a slightly better, clearer place.
When it comes to what may have gone behind this decision, as you saw in Lisa's report, there was a sharp sell-off in U.S. government bond markets earlier today, and that followed Treasury yields, which typically investors would buy, rising the most that they have in decades. Why is that sell-off significant, and could that have impacted the president's decision?
Well, a key piece of American strength is the idea that we're a safe haven for the world. And a safe haven means when something goes wrong, either out in the world or in the United States, people come into American government debt, into treasuries, which should mean that the interest rate will fall. But instead, the interest rate was rising. So there was a pressure and at least a signal that we're not as safe as we thought we were. And perhaps there's a crisis of confidence in the United States. All these thoughts were going around. So I think the White House got the message that the bond market was signaling a lack of confidence in the strategy, and it was time to back off.
So, Doug, some relief in some countries, many countries, who now get a 90-day pause to negotiate some of those terms. But, of course, the trade war with China has only ramped up. When you look at these tariffs now between the U.S. and China, how do they compare with tariffs we've seen in the past?
Well, this is really historically unprecedented to have the world's two largest economies that had been highly integrated, relatively low tariffs on one another, raising tariffs to such an extent. I mean, over 100% in the U.S. case, up to about 84% in the case of China. You can compare this to past tariff acts, such as the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. That was more broad-based in terms of its impact, but in terms of the total change in the tariff, doesn't even amount to this. So this is really an amazing disintegration of trade between two large trading partners. And of course, we still have tariffs on other countries as well.
And those other countries, of course, as you mentioned, still facing that 10% baseline tariff. That's on top of, we should mention, too, existing tariffs that went into place on Canada, Mexico, on steel and aluminum. What do we know, Doug, about the kind of impact that those existing tariffs will already have?
Well, they'll raise prices for consumers, and a lot of consumers here are American businesses that depend on intermediate inputs and components to undertake production domestically. So it's not just households, it's businesses that have to adjust in terms of these higher costs. We expect to see some retaliation as well. The European Union has already indicated as much. Obviously, a shrinkage of trade and uncertainty about whether these tariffs will remain in effect or whether they might be lifted at some point as well. And one thing that's underestimated or sometimes misinterpreted is the poisoning of international relations. So these are very disruptive. They've been imposed, as President Trump has said, on our friends as well as our foes. We have a lot of free trade agreements around the world. Those are getting ripped up to some extent. And so the disruption is worldwide in some sense.
Simon, pick up on that idea. It struck me earlier that the Treasury Secretary said this 90-day pause will allow for negotiations for those countries to unfold on a country-by-country basis, and that President Trump wants to be personally involved, he said, in each of those negotiations. What do you make of that approach to do this country by country?
I think there's going to be more than one 90-day extension, honestly. It takes a long time. A proper trade negotiation isn't 10 minutes in the Oval Office and 30 minutes down the hall to sign the papers. You've got to spend days and sometimes weeks if you want to make real progress. Now, if it's just for show, sure, that's relatively quick. But 70 countries negotiating substantially with the United States and actually getting to a deal that we wouldn't otherwise have had, that takes a long time.
Doug, what do you make of that, this country-by-country approach? How do you see this playing out?
Well, first of all, you have to sort of ask, what is the deal that we're looking for from other countries? Other countries don't affect their trade deficit directly. I think the extent of unfair trade practices has been exaggerated, and we're hitting countries that we already have free trade agreements with these higher tariffs. So we have actually a trade surplus with Australia. We have a free trade agreement with them. We have a trade surplus with Peru. We have a free trade agreement with them. And so it's quite indiscriminate who we're hitting with these. And the question is, what sort of deal, what sort of the bilateral bargain is that we're asking for?
Simon, holistically, when you look at this, the fact that these are now unilateral deals being negotiated, the ramping up of a trade war between the two largest economies on the planet, does this suggest the end of the globalization era to you?
It's not the end of anything. It's the beginning of a phase, a new phase of stepping back from globalization. So deglobalization is what people are calling it. But I think the key, Amna, is what happens with China. So it's China's move next. Where do they go with tariffs? Where do they go with rare earths? Where do they go with their holding of U.S. government debt, which was substantial? China has a lot of cards to play. We'll see what happens, and we'll see whether they want to de-escalate, and we'll see whether Mr. Trump can find a way to de-escalate with respect to China.
Do you see any potential off-ramps ahead? So far, we've only seen the two countries going toe-to-toe in a matter of days. Where does this go next between these two nations?
Well, honestly, the most obvious off-ramp is for China to back down now. But politically, it's just very hard to imagine that they're going to want to do that. And so, therefore, I think as a practical matter, we're going to enter a new phase. It's about the United States and China. That's a very important set of issues strategically and also in terms of trade. These issues do need to be resolved. But are we going to do it in a peaceful, reasonable manner, or are we going to do it in some way that further destabilizes everyone's expectations and market prices?
Doug, in terms of the way that markets globally and investors are looking at this, of course, we saw these rallies today, which the White House is pointing to as a sign of success in the strategy. But that's, of course, in response to the tariffs being paused. Does that say to you that if the tariffs go back up or if negotiations don't yield some kind of results, those markets will plunge once again?
I don't know about plunge, but they will certainly go down. Once again, if you look at the tariffs that the Trump administration had planned to impose, in fact, did impose at 12:01 this morning, and then rescinded later in the day, they were very steep on other countries such as Vietnam, nearly 50%. And so those are really draconian tariffs. once again, historically unprecedented. This is only a pause. The tariffs on Canada and Mexico had been paused previously, but there's, once again, just creating a lot of uncertainty. They could go into effect in the future. The markets will respond to that negatively, but the uncertainty is just unknowable at this point.
Simon, it's a dangerous game to predict what happens next right now, but I'll ask you the same question in the last minute we have. What do you see happening now?
More uncertainty, I think, Amna, is that's going to be the word for the quarter, maybe for the year. And it's very hard for businesses in particular to make any kind of sensible decisions when everything is so uncertain. Should we invest in this or in that, in the United States or elsewhere? Now, consumers obviously have to struggle with some of the same decisions. For them, the uncertainty may mean they might want to make some purchases now before tariffs go into effect. But on the other hand, they might lose their job, so perhaps they shouldn't make any purchases at all. So uncertainty is generally going to have a slowing effect.
Simon Johnson, Douglas Irwin, great to speak with you both. Thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, let's talk now about the kind of impact that these tariffs, threats, and changes mean for business directly. In the United States, the vast majority of shoes sold here are imported, which means tariffs are a real issue. I spoke just a short time ago with Matt Priest. He's the president and CEO of the trade group Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. Matt, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Amna. It's a pleasure to be here.
So things obviously are changing very quickly on this front. As we sit here and speak now, we know President Trump has kept in place that 10% baseline tariff, ramped up tariffs on China, and paused them for 90 days on most other countries. But it's worth pointing out the majority of shoes in the U.S. are imported. When you look at where they come from, the vast majority are from China, also from Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, and fewer than from India. What does all of this back and forth on the tariffs mean for the businesses you represent? And who are we talking about here?
Yeah, we represent 97% of the shoe industry here in the U.S., Amna, and so that is Nike, Under Armour, Asics, Dick's Sporting Goods, Target, Walmart, and then all the way down to family importers that bring in product every single day. And so our goal right now is to try to drive as much certainty to the business that we can, but it's a really difficult thing to do in this environment. With each passing day, there's a tariff that's added, there's a tariff that's taken off. And so our members are scrambling to understand what the real life impact will be on costing for consumers here in the days and weeks to come.
Even with the rollback of these tariffs, does that mean the problems have gone away for these businesses? Are they no longer worried?
No, they're definitely still worried. I mean, the rollback is a positive thing. We want to commend the White House for doing that because we think there has to be some time to negotiate some of these outcomes with particularly these countries that aren't China. But the fact of the matter is the Chinese tariff is going to 125%. I had a member tell me just yesterday, Matt, I've got to figure out how to sell a pair of shoes to a customer I sold to last year at double the price. And in these hyperinflationary times that we're still in, that's going to be a really difficult thing to do.
Double the price you're expecting in terms of shoes coming from China. That's
right.
What the tariffs would mean.
That's right.
And with the other countries now, tell me a little bit about how this manufacturing process works. Could it be that because the tariffs have gone up so high on China, a lot of that other supply will now shift from other countries where the tariffs aren't in place? How is that possible?
I think the fact of the matter is the tariffs are in place everywhere. So, for example, a pair of sneakers coming out of Vietnam had a 20% duty prior to last night. Overnight, we got to a 66% duty. And now with the president's action of the pause, we're down to a 30% duty. So there's still a 30% duty, a 33% increase on our costs coming out of Vietnam alone. So there's really nowhere to go in particular, but I think our members will continue to look for ways in which they can leverage other sourcing countries to deliver great product to American consumers.
So one argument we've heard is that if foreign imports on any products do become more expensive for American consumers, they will shift to domestic products.
Right.
Do you see that happening in your business?
I don't, and there's a reason for that. We've long had duties in place for nearly 100 years. We pay $4 billion a year before any of this action took place just on duties for imports. Production has left decades ago or may have not even started here. And so what we find is what's still made here for footwear is made for U.S. military purposes or for consumers that really focus in on that. But the fact of the matter is we have 340 million consumers. We bring in over 2 billion pairs of shoes a year. We do not have the capacity or the willingness, to be honest with you, to make the types of shoes that are necessary to meet that demand.
Is that the kind of manufacturing capacity that could be built up over time? That's another argument we hear.
It could be built up over time, but it will not be with U.S. labor. And the challenge is all these tariffs, Amna, are actually being also placed on machinery, parts, components, and materials that we would import in to establish domestic production. And so they're making it not very competitive from an economic perspective to bring that back here anyway.
Matt Priest, President and CEO of the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, for more now on how the market volatility could affect your wallet, I'm joined by Michelle Singletary. She's personal finance columnist for The Washington Post. Michelle, welcome back. And I know how people navigate this moment really depends on who they are and where they are in life. Let's take it group by group here. For people who are close to retirement, for the 70 million Americans who invest in a 401k, what should they be doing or not doing in this moment?
I hate to say this because the inclination is to do it, but don't look. Just don't. I have not looked at my portfolio since the Trump administration announced these tariffs because the market started to slide then. When you look at the actual numbers, the natural tendency is for you to panic. And you can panic and scream, but don't act on that. And that's one thing. And then when things calm down, if they ever in the short term, you might need to revisit. Perhaps you have too much risk in your portfolio. But for many seniors, they're going to have 10, 15, 20, even 30 years left in their retirement. And so you have to keep your eye on that your portfolio still needs to have growth in it so that you can buy the things that you need in your retirement years.
What about for folks who've been weighing a big purchase, a house or a car? They've been watching rates fall. They've been waiting for the moment to jump. Should they keep waiting?
I think if you had the money together, you knew that you were in the market, you crunched the numbers, it was going to be okay, you're not going to be in trouble. Go ahead and make that vehicle purchase now. Don't wait. You can see the flip-flop that's going on. But if you already knew that you were stretching into that car, then I would not do it. Fix it up, if you can, before you jump in, because if this flips back the other way, you could lose your job with a new car note on your books, and you don't want that.
Michelle, I want to ask you to help us navigate some messages we've heard from the president directly, because over the last few days, as the trade wars were ramping up, President Trump repeatedly online delivered this kind of message. On Friday, he posted, "This is a great time to get rich." This morning, he posted, "This is a great time to buy." Who is he talking to with these messages as the global and U.S. markets were plunging?
I don't know who he's talking to, because he's not talking to the regular people. Maybe he's talking to his billionaire buddies who can buy another yacht, but he's not talking to the rest of America and the rest of the world, really. It's easy for him to say that. He doesn't have to worry about the food on his table or even the roof over his head. You're playing with people's money. And the thing that bothers me the most is that people lose their confidence in the economy and the market. And when they lose their confidence, they pull back. They're scared. They're spooked. And that's what really concerns me. Lots of people jumped out and they may not get back in, and they need that growth, because one of the biggest dangers to your portfolio, to your future, is inflation. And if your dollar's not invested in a sound way, then you could lose that value of that dollar that you might want to put in your mattress. And so I think he's being too flippant in those comments about what's happened. And I think that has angered a lot of people and concerned a lot of people. I've heard from retirees and even young adults who are like, what should I do? That's not how you want to lead.
Michelle, we know for most Americans, even the existing tariffs will be felt in some way as prices will go up. In the 30 seconds or so I have left, what's your one piece of advice to everyday Americans about navigating this moment?
I think if you were already struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, or you're not sure about the security of your job, like the federal workers, you pull back, you budget tight, you're going to cancel that vacation, you're going to cancel that major project that you might have had on board. If you're still okay, you've got a good amount of money saved, then I would go ahead and do some of the things you were going to do, but be very cautious about that. Just watch that budget, because it's still going to be a tough ride for a little while.
All right, Michelle Singletary, personal finance columnist for The Washington Post. Great to speak with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
In the day's other headlines, the White House says it's frozen nearly $2 billion in federal funds meant for Cornell and Northwestern universities. The freeze includes more than $1 billion to Cornell and about $790 million for Northwestern. Neither school says it's heard yet from the White House or Department of Education on the basis for the freeze, but the administration says the schools are being investigated for alleged civil rights violations. Cornell and Northwestern join other universities, including Columbia, UPenn, Harvard, and Princeton, that have had their federal funds tied to demands by the administration to change school policies. Also this afternoon, President Trump signed executive orders that direct the Department of Justice to investigate Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs. Both served as Homeland Security officials in Trump's previous administration and later criticized him publicly. That follows a pattern by Mr. Trump to investigate former officials and perceived political opponents. 2 federal judges in Texas and New York have barred the Trump administration from deporting 5 Venezuelans jailed in those states for being alleged gang members. The move is temporary, while the men's lawyers challenge the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act that lets presidents imprison and deport non-citizens during war. This comes after the Supreme Court ruled this week that deportations could resume under that 18th century law, but also said potential deportees must be afforded some due process. The death toll from a nightclub roof collapse in the Dominican Republic has risen to at least 124, with more than 250 people hurt. The roof of the Jet Set nightclub fell in early Tuesday morning, and rescue workers were still searching for survivors more than 24 hours later. The club hosted regular merengue parties that drew well-known artists and celebrities. Victims have included a professional baseball player, a politician, and musicians. Authorities are still investigating the cause of the collapse. Beijing today denied Ukrainian claims that Chinese citizens are fighting alongside Russia in its invasion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky released video on Tuesday, which he said showed a captured Chinese soldier. He added today that Ukrainian intelligence had knowledge of more than 150 Chinese citizens fighting for Russia. Beijing called Ukraine's claims unfounded.
This statement is groundless. China's position on the Ukrainian crisis issue is clear and widely recognized by the international community. Ukraine should correctly view China's efforts and constructive role in seeking a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis.
China added that it's asked its citizens not to get involved in any armed conflict, appearing to suggest that the captured Chinese joined Russia voluntarily. The Trump administration has reinstated emergency food aid to at least 6 impoverished countries. Earlier this week, the UN's World Food Program received word that the U.S. was cutting funding to help feed 14 countries. The State Department has since admitted some of those funds were cut by mistake without elaborating. Food funds to Ecuador, Somalia, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria were restored, but cuts will remain for war-ravaged Afghanistan and Yemen. The status of funding for 6 other unidentified countries remains unclear. And every year, the Library of Congress adds new songs, albums, and sounds to its National Recording Registry. This year, 25 new selections join the hundreds of recordings considered instrumental to American society. Inductees include Celine Dion's Oscar-winning My Heart Will Go On from the 1997 film Titanic. Other additions spanned almost a century, from the 1913 Hawaiian song Aloha Oe to the original Broadway recording of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton in 2015. There were less conventional inclusions, too, like music from the Minecraft video game and the Microsoft Windows reboot chime. For a full list of this year's selections, you can find them at pbs.org/newshour. Still to come on the NewsHour, a shakeup at the IRS over plans to share personal data with immigration authorities. Michael Lewis's new book on why the work of government employees matters. And the stars of the hit series The Handmaid's Tale discuss its 6th and final season.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The top official at the IRS is resigning after news of a deal between the agency and immigration authorities to share sensitive personal data became public on Monday. William Brangham joins us now with more. William?
That's right, Amna. For decades, the IRS encouraged undocumented immigrants to file their taxes with the assurance that their data would be protected. But now, this unprecedented agreement would give authorities who want to deport migrants access to personal records that include job information, home addresses, and more. It comes less than a week before tax day and after a tumultuous few months that also saw mass layoffs across the agency. So to help understand what this all could mean, we are joined now by Natasha Sarin. She's the president of the Budget Lab at Yale University. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. So immigration officials will now have access to this personal data of migrants who are living in this country and filing their taxes. And when news of this broke, the head of the IRS, Melanie Krause, quit. How unusual is this agreement and this quitting?
So, to put the sort of quitting in some context, we are now at a state where the IRS has gone through 3 commissioners in one filing season. In modern history, there has been nothing like it, or nothing even close to it, frankly. And the fact that Melanie Krause chose to resign is really pretty indicative of things being quite awry at the IRS. Because Melanie, in terms of public reporting, at least is what we've seen, has been someone who, from the agency's perspective, has been incredibly keen to work with the administration, to work with DOJ on their efforts with respect to workforce reductions and data sharing agreements. And so for her to be of the view that at this moment, 1 week before tax day, it is no longer tenable for her to be at the helm of this agency, I think tells you a lot about how dire circumstances really are there. And with respect to the nature of this data sharing agreement, there has really been nothing like it in the history of the IRS, and for very good reason. As you mentioned, the agency has historically made clear to undocumented immigrants and to their employers that they should feel secure from a privacy perspective in complying with their tax obligations, paying into the IRS, $66 billion in federal taxes each year, because their data won't be weaponized or used for law enforcement in this manner. And now, after sort of building up that trust with this population and being in a state where people really had faith that their data would be secure and protected and not used for any other purpose other than tax administration, except in incredibly rare circumstances, you're in a situation where this type of data sharing is going to occur going forward. And we think that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars over the course of the next decade.
I mean, that seems like a natural occurrence from all of this. Separate from that news, DOJ has also been cutting quite considerably the IRS workforce. What do you know about who has been laid off from the IRS and what kind of work were they doing?
So far, what we know is that the agency has laid off about 7,000 probationary employees. And these are people who are either relatively recent hires to the agency or people who are, frankly, such good performers that they've recently been promoted to new roles within the agency. And disproportionately, these cuts are coming from individuals who work on activities related to tax compliance and tax enforcement within the IRS. And that's really concerning because already the IRS had so little capacity to be able to expend resources on enforcement, particularly of high earners, where every $1 that the IRS spends, every 1 hour that they spend auditing a multimillionaire generates $4,500 in owed taxes to the agency. So these are highly productive people that were doing very important work. And as a result of the workforce reductions we've already seen, they've left the agency. You're also in a situation where the IRS is making preparations and DOJ is making preparations for workforce reductions that range based on public reporting, from somewhere between 25 to 50% of the agency. That would put the size of the IRS at levels that it hasn't seen since 1960, at a time when the population was 60 million people fewer than it is today. And so I am really concerned, and this relates to the nature of the fact that we will be on our fourth IRS commissioner of this filing season, that the tax system is kind of on the brink of breaking already.
I know your organization did an analysis of what happens when you take a lot of these cops off the beat, to use an expression. But you also tried to calculate what would happen if the general public started to get the idea that there were less cops on the beat and they were less likely to get audited. What did you find there?
Importantly, the sort of cop on the beat, the taxpayer behavior effects that you're talking about, they're actually even more significant than the direct costs of not being able to do audits. And what we find is that as a result of those behavioral effects, the IRS is on track to lose anywhere from $400 billion to over $2.4 trillion in taxes that are owed over the course of the next decade as a result of not being able to have cops on the beat.
And these are taxes that are legally owed. This is not like they're going after people in a punitive way.
No, these are taxes that are legally owed. And importantly, it's not just taxes that are legally owed by people who are looking to evade. Another aspect of what the IRS isn't going to be able to do as well going forward is help taxpayers get it right when they want assistance from the agency about, like, should I be paying taxes on this type of income and how do I report it? Those types of investments that the IRS has recently been able to scale up because it's had some resources, but now it's having to scale those back down already this filing season.
All right, that is Natasha Sarin of the Yale Budget Lab. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
The role of the federal government has been squarely at the center of the national debate the last few months. But who are the people who comprise that system of government? Judy Woodruff set out for answers in her ongoing series, America at a Crossroads.
160 feet below the surface, my team and I got a crash course on the history of coal mining and what was once one of the leading causes of death in mines.
Right? And this square is coal that has not been mined. That's what's keeping the mountain over our heads.
Christopher Mark spent his life's work trying to prevent roof collapses in coal mines. He works for the U.S. Department of Labor's Mine Safety and Health Administration, but was speaking to us as a private citizen.
That was one of the things when I started looking at the data and saying, let's just not look, kind of in general at what the coal industry thinks is important. Let's look at what's really killing people.
Mark began his career underground in 1976, working as a coal miner himself in West Virginia, after graduating from high school in Princeton, New Jersey. He later went on to get a Ph.D. in mining engineering and now lives near the Tour Ed mine and museum we visited together just north of Pittsburgh.
Part of the problem was that the engineers who had been attacking this problem had been looking at it with an engineering mindset.
But Mark took that mindset and combined it with statistics to create new software that's credited with saving an untold number of lives. Mark and his work are one of the stories in a new book edited by best-selling author Michael Lewis, Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service. It's based on a Washington Post series written by Lewis and 6 other authors.
It's sort of like all the mess that the private sector can't solve, that is really hard to solve, ends up being government responsibility.
We met up with Lewis at Politics and Prose in Washington, where he explained how he picked Mark's name off last year's list of nominees for the annual Sammys Awards, Samuel J. Heyman Service to America Medals, created by the nonprofit Partnership for Public Service.
There was one character who was kind of described in this list. It said, Chris Mark, Department of Labor, solved the problem of coal mine roofs falling in on the heads of coal mines, which killed 50,000 coal miners in the last century. And then it said, a former coal miner. And I thought, there's got to be a story there. It's like, who comes out of a coal mine and solves a big technical problem like that? He saved thousands of lives. No one knew who he was. He didn't care if anybody knew who he was.
A turning point in Chris Mark's career and in mine safety was the August 2007 collapse at the Crandall Canyon mine in Utah that killed 9 miners and rescuers. It was blamed on inadequate mine design that led to the failure of roof-supporting pillars. Mark was asked by Congress to come up with a way to reduce similar accidents. Since then, the number of roof fall deaths has declined dramatically to 0 deaths in 2016. Mark says the federal government, rather than private industry, was needed to make the changes.
If somebody did come up with a better approach to pillar design, their own company would have wanted to keep that in-house because it would have saved them money and their competitors wouldn't have had it. But because the federal government developed it and it was specifically a safety measure, then we're trying to diffuse it as widely and as rapidly as possible. And nobody else has that incentive.
What is your estimate of how many mine collapses have been avoided and lives have been saved as a result of what you've done?
That's really very difficult to do. And I mean, a big part of the role that the government plays in Americans' lives is to avert disasters. And there's really no way of counting the disasters that you've averted and the number of lives that you've saved.
When Lewis was pulling the book together, he gave no guidance to the 6 contributing writers other than to find interesting stories. The result? 8 essays, an ode to public service that Lewis says were more typical than not.
I could write 100 stories like this in the federal government. They're just kind of there waiting because it is this great and neglected institution filled with really interesting people. So help me God.
Since taking office, President Trump and special government employee Elon Musk have effectively shuttered entire agencies and slashed the federal workforce.
Many of them don't work at all. Many of them never showed up to work. We want to cut the people that aren't working or not doing a good job. We're keeping the best people.
Their goal? To reduce federal spending by at least $1 trillion.
At the end of the day, America is going to be in much better shape. America will be solvent. The critical programs that people depend upon will work, and it's going to be a fantastic future.
In the working out of a great national program that seeks the primary good of the greater number.
The modern federal government began to take form nearly a century ago as a reaction to the Great Depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, combined with the impact of World War II, significantly broadened the government's influence over nearly every area of life. But by the 1960s, public support for government and the people who work in it began to wane, and the role of government has become increasingly divisive. According to a recent Pew Research Center poll, just 38% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents expressed a great deal or fair amount of confidence in federal career employees, compared with 72% of Democrats and Democratic leaners. Lewis said these starkly different views of government is a result of how the civil service is portrayed by elected officials.
Ronald Reagan famously campaigned on the idea that the most dangerous words in the English language is I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help you. There's an incentive system in politics, and the incentive, if you're an elected official in Washington, there's an incentive to take credit for anything that works, and to blame career people for anything that doesn't work, and that the population has been more or less conditioned to hear negative things about the federal workforce.
Lewis points out that the number of civil service employees has remained constant over the past 50 years at 2.3 million, even as the country has grown. He acknowledges there's room to cut waste and inefficiency, but questions how the administration is doing it.
The way they were going about it is not designed to save very much money. I mean, if you look at the federal budget, I think 86% of it is either entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, interest payments on the debt, or defense. And they're not addressing any of those. All their cuts are taking place in a sliver of the pie that's just 14%. There's only so much they can do there. And this is the first time I've seen anybody go in and vilify the workforce in advance of getting rid of people. So like treating them as the enemy, and with a conscious strategy of traumatizing the workforce.
With the careers of so many other civil service employees uncertain, Lewis told us none of the others profiled in the book were willing to speak with us on camera. 2 of the workers he profiled, he added, resigned before they could be fired. Have you experienced a climate like what we're seeing right now, where there's fear of speaking out?
No, this really is something new. I mean, I've worked for the federal government now for almost 40 years, and I've seen administrations come and go, but I've never had the experience where, we would get emails that imply that somehow we're the problem, that we're doing bad things. In my experience, people work for the federal government primarily the same way anybody works anywhere else. I mean, you're doing it to earn a living, but federal employees are proud of what they do. They're proud of the contributions that we make to society.
The government's not just this incidental piece of democracy. So what has happened and what is accelerating is if you disable the government, like make it even harder for the good people who are in it to do their jobs, so they do them less well, through no fault of their own, you just have not given them the tools to do their job, you reinforce the idea that government can't do anything. You create this vicious cycle of cynicism and make the country essentially ungovernable. So that's where it's headed, chaos. I don't think we're going to go there. I think we're going to bounce. I really do. I think we're a more constructive country. We're too successful a country, basically. We'd be throwing too much away. So I think we're going to bounce, but if you want to destroy the society, you destroy the government.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Washington.
The Handmaid's Tale began as a 1985 novel read by generations. It's since been turned into a film and an opera, and then, beginning in 2017, a hit series on Hulu, one now coming to an end. Senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown has a look for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
For years, we've been afraid of them. Now it's time for them to be afraid of us.
It's time for a reckoning in Gilead, the fictional near-future theocratic dictatorship the U.S. has become in the hit Hulu series The Handmaid's Tale, now beginning its 6th and final season.
Our audience has been very loyal and patient, and, revolutions take time.
Shut your mouth. Be a good girl.
Elizabeth Moss plays June Osborne, a handmaid, a category of women forced into sexual servitude as childbearers in a future in which most women are infertile. In season 1, viewers saw how she and most women have lost their freedoms, and in some cases had their children taken from them, as democracy was overthrown and the country came under the control of a religious patriarchy. In 2017, as the series was making its debut, Moss spoke to us about her character.
The heroine of the book is an anti-heroine, that she's a human, that she's a wife, a mom, is a normal person, and then is sort of picked up, taken, and dropped into this scenario and has to figure out how to survive.
We talked again recently as the series prepared to reach its end. 6 seasons later, she has done a lot of fighting, a lot of surviving.
A lot of surviving, and I think in the interim 6 years, I do think that she has become more of a hero, which is really interesting to hear that quote and hear, where I was coming from and what I was thinking at that time. And I was absolutely right. And I think in the 6 seasons, very quickly, probably in that first season, she definitely became not a normal person, and she became a heroine. And I think that, but I also think that she became the heroine in the way that you or I would have to in those circumstances.
The series is based on the classic 1985 novel by Margaret Atwood, who mixed elements of past totalitarian systems with strains of American life to write what she calls speculative fiction. In 2019, as she was releasing her sequel, The Testaments, she defined that to us.
The series, as well as the book, and as well as the Testaments, follow one axiom, and that is you can't put anything in that doesn't have a precedent.
After season 1 of the series, the tale ventured well beyond the original book, creating new plot twists, giving other characters larger roles and their own backstories.
God has a plan for me, and I cannot hide from his plan anymore.
One of those, Serena Joy, wife of one of Gilead's leaders. When we first meet her, she's seemingly a true believer in its system, even as other women suffer.
It really has been a place where I've never really died a creative death, because it is so tricky and difficult, and she's such an interesting character to play.
I know what people think of the things that I've done. What do you think of the things you've done?
Yvonne Strahovski plays Serena Joy, one of the most complex characters in the series, who comes to see the system for what it is, but whose actions raise issues of response and complicity.
She sees it, and then she goes right back into her ways, and then she sees it again, and then she goes right back into it, and it's so complex and nuanced, you know, the writing.
It's been 6 seasons, but with production time, the pandemic, and the writers and actors strikes, the series actually unspooled over 9 years. Elizabeth Moss, who many got to know for her role on Mad Men, has been involved throughout as executive producer and as an occasional director, as well as the lead.
Luke is in jail. He was arrested for defending me. The man who ran me over died.
Is it hard to sustain a series over so long a period? Is it hard to sustain a character?
It's why I love television. I was thinking about this the other day. There's something that happens in season 6 that you don't get to do, and you don't get any impact from if you don't have 6 or 5 seasons of story to look back on. And it takes 9 years to get there. And I love that.
The final season, like the first, is airing at the start of a new Trump administration. For many, its themes have spoken to ongoing battles over women's rights. And the handmaids themselves have become cultural figures beyond the screen.
I find it incredibly just fascinating how aligned our show has been to the political climate and what we're living through, especially in the States. It's sort of almost like a psychic alignment of art imitating life and vice versa.
You know, sometimes shows go through something where they're, oh, now it feels like people are drawing parallels, but I've never had a moment where this show hasn't been relevant. You did that interview with us 7 years ago, and here we are, you know, it's still, we're having the same conversation.
Blessed be the fruit. Let the revolution begin.
No spoiler alerts here, but the trailer for season 6 does tell us that an uprising is at hand. Some relief in Gilead and for faithful viewers.
A lot of people are living through dark times right now and all over the world. And we really wanted to provide something that was maybe a bit of, just lightness and hope and positivity. That's not to say, of course, we're still The Handmaid's Tale. There's still darkness. We can't walk away from that. It wouldn't be an honest show or an honest story. But we did try to give some light at the end of the tunnel.
And for you personally, given these various roles you've played in the series, does it feel like the right time to bring it to an end?
I would never end it if I had the choice. I keep going. Another 10 years would be totally fine with me.
Rise up and fight.
That won't happen, but the creator of The Handmaid's Tale, Bruce Miller, is now working on its sequel, The Testaments. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
Friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.